satam pati bhakti yogena tivrena viraktya chanayet vasham ata eva shanais chittam prasaktam asatam pati bhakti yogena tivrena viraktya chanayet vasam ata eva shanais chittam prasaktam asatam pati bhakti yogena tivrena viraktya chanayet vasam Word-to-word meaning, ata eva, therefore, shanai, gradually, chittam, mind, consciousness, prasaktam, attached, asatam, of material enjoyments, pati, on the path, bhakti yogena, by devotional service, tivrena, very serious, viraktya, without attachment, cha, and nayet, he must bring, vasham, under control. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. It is the duty of every conditioned soul to engage his polluted consciousness, which is now attached to material enjoyment, in very serious devotional service with detachment. Thus his mind and consciousness will be under full control. Purport. The process of liberation is very nicely explained in this verse. The cause of one's becoming conditioned by material nature is his thinking himself the enjoyer, the proprietor, or the friend of all living entities. This false thinking is a result of contemplation on sense enjoyment. When one thinks that he is the best friend of his countrymen, to society, or to humanity, and he engages in various nationalistic, philanthropic, and altruistic activities, all that is just so much concentration on sense gratification. The so-called national leader or humanist does not serve everyone. He serves his senses only. That is a fact. But the conditioned soul cannot understand this because he is bewildered by the spell of material nature. It is therefore recommended in this verse that one engage very seriously in the devotional service of the Lord. This means that one should not think that he is a proprietor, benefactor, friend, or enjoyer. He should always be cognizant that the real enjoyer is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the basic principle of Bhakti Yoga. One must be firmly convinced of these three principles. One should always think that Krishna is the proprietor, Krishna is the enjoyer, and Krishna is the friend. Not only should he understand these principles himself, but he should try to convince others and propagate Krishna consciousness. As soon as one engages in such serious devotional service of the Lord, naturally the propensity to falsely claim lordship over material nature disappears. That detachment is called vairagya. Instead of being absorbed in so-called material lordship, one engages in Krishna consciousness, that is, control of consciousness. The yoga process necessitates controlling his senses. Yoga indriya samyamaha. Since the senses are always active, their activity should be engaged in devotional service. One cannot stop their activities. If one wants to artificially stop the activities of the senses, his attempts will be a failure. Even the great yogi Vishwamitra, who was trying to control his senses by the yoga process, fell victim to the beauty of Menaka. There are many such instances. Unless one's mind and consciousness are fully engaged in devotional service, there is always the opportunity for the mind to become occupied with desires for sense gratification. One particular point mentioned in this verse is very significant. It is said here, prasaktam asatam pati. The mind is always attached by asat, the temporary material existence. Because we have been associated with material nature since time immemorial, we have become accustomed to our attachment to this temporary material nature. The mind has to be fixed at the eternal lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. Savai manah Krishna padara vindayo. One has to fix the mind at the lotus feet of Krishna. Then everything will be very nice. Thus, the seriousness of Bhakti Yoga is stressed in this verse. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dhinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostude Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Here Mother Devahuti approaches Lord Kapila in the proper spirit of understanding spiritual knowledge. She put herself, even though she is a mother, she put herself in the role of a disciple. She presented herself as a woman who can't understand spiritual wisdom. At the same time, she made pertinent inquiries. She was frustrated with her existence in this material world, as we many times hear this term, sick and tired of being sick and tired. So she was in that state, and then she asks Lord Kapila a lot of pertinent questions, and the answer to those questions are the expansions in different chapters here. So this particular chapter is Lord Kapila's answer to one such pertinent question which Mother Devahuti asked. the Acharya is right that a person would want to know the path which he has to follow. An inquisitive person likes to know the quick path which will take him to the destination. But an intelligent person will also want to know the path which is followed by others. Mother Devahuti will inquire about the best process. Lord Kapila will answer bhakti, but she will also ask about elaboration on the knowledge path, the path of jnana and the path of yoga. So this conversation is happening in the chapter 25, where Mother Devahuti was asking pertinent question, what kind of bhakti should I perform? And explain the jnana by which one understands the tattvas. So that expands into chapter 26 and 27. So that's why all the explanation of the material nature, how the living entity, even though not affected by the modes, comes in his pure state. He is untouched by the modes. How does he come under the control of the modes, and how he becomes conditioned? The word conditioned we can understand by taking the current example of now that winter is approaching. We are not accustomed to wearing so much of layers, but when we get used to wearing the inner layer, middle layer and the outer layer and the chadar and all of that, we are becoming conditioned, and we take a kind of pleasure in that. Our natural state is one and our unnatural state is another one. But the conditioning makes one comfortable even in that uncomfortable state. That's what the Prakriti does for you. It makes you think that you're going to be happy by all of these endeavors. So that's the conditioning. So how material nature conditions the living entity? So that tattva she wants to know. And she also wants to know the path of jnana and the path of Ashtanga Yoga. So this particular chapter, 27, explains the tattva for which Mother Devahuti asked in chapter 25. This particular verse is like the culmination of the theme of how the living entity, even though he is unaffected by the modes, how does he become bound? So this theme of claiming proprietorship begins from the text 1 itself. And then the same theme continues, and the theme of false ego is being brought up in the second verse, identifying the body as the self and being absorbed in material activities. Under the false ego, he thinks he is the proprietor of everything. So the theme of proprietorship is again carried forward here. And what does this lead to? So if you're thinking you're the proprietor and you're performing pious activities, if you deserve, then you are promoted to heavenly planets, where you can use that lording it over mentality as a demigod. So still the transmigration doesn't stop. As we hear in the Bhagavad Gita, Abrahma bhuvana loka punara avrittino Arjuna. The real issue of life, which is the birth, death, old age and disease, that is not fixed. You're still transmigrating from one species to the other, higher and lower, because of his association with the modes of material nature. And the work he does is also faulty, as described in text 3. Then again in the text 4, the mentality of lording it over material nature is stressed. Then the contemplation on the objects of the senses and how one, this fall down sequence in the chapter 2, contemplate on the objects of the senses, you develop you develop attachment. Then lust, and then lust, when it is not fulfilled, transforms into anger. Then you lose your memory of you being the eternal servant. You lose that memory, and intelligence is bewildered, and then you fall down. That was described. And then the theme of philanthropic work is being brought out in yesterday's purport and today's purport also. Prabhupada touches upon this. Now the key themes in this particular verse that are coming up are the process of liberation. The power of bhakti is being brought out, and that's why the bhakti yogena tivrena is being brought out here. The path of jnana is being described. This is bhakti mishra jnana, where jnana is prominent, the goal is liberation, but I will also do some bhakti and ashtanga yoga to attain my goal. See, according to the goal you set, that kind of a process you will choose. In the earlier chapter itself, Lord Kapila will briefly mention about impersonal liberation, and the jnanis take up this path to attain impersonal liberation. Even to attain the impersonal Brahman, just the path of jnana, which is in the mode of goodness, cannot help. Bhakti has to be there even to elevate a jnani to the level of Brahman. And that's why in this Bhakti Mishra Jnana, even though Jnana is prominent, Bhakti also plays a part in that. And that's why Lord Kapila here stresses on the point that the duty of every conditioned soul to engage his polluted consciousness, which is now attached to material enjoyment, in very serious devotional service with detachment. In the Bhagavad Gita also you'll see 13th chapter onwards, the language of Lord Krishna will change. Like middle 6 chapters, it's all about bhakti, attach your mind to me, always think of me. And then there'll be a shift in the tone in which Lord will speak from 13th chapter onwards. Knowledge, object of knowledge, knower, detachment. These are all the words that captures the mind of jnanis, because that's what they want to be detached. They want to get out of their material existence. The prime impetus which is pushing them is, I'm fed up with this material world, I need to get out of it, I need to get liberated. And then accordingly they choose a path. Still, even in that, when describing the items of knowledge, Lord will put Maicha Ananya Bhavena Bhaktir Avyabhicharini. So that's also an item of knowledge. So one has to perform devotional service. It may not be pure, but still you have to perform to attain your desired result, even if the desired result is merging into Brahman. So that is one of the themes that's coming up. Then the theme of altruistic philanthropic work and how that is not done with the proper attitude. Because in the Nectar of Instruction, Prabhupada will write that advancement of a practitioner depends upon the attitude. So here, a lot of philanthropic work is being done. And when describing such kind of mentality, Prabhupada will use the word extended selfishness. Now, this may seem a little hard, and that's what in the purport also Prabhupada touches. This is, you're trying to do social work, philanthropic work, nationalistic work. All that is just so much concentration on sense gratification. So in a morning walk, when this theme of philanthropic work is discussed, either in a morning walk or in a lecture on this particular theme, Prabhupada will describe about how he took this extended selfishness from his Guru Maharaj, this particular terminology. So he'll go on to explain So I am fulfilling the needs of my senses, and in the theme of how the jiva is always a servant, because you're bringing the sense object to a particular sense. For example, Prabhu is drinking water. So the water doesn't go into the eyes or to the ears or to the nose. It goes into the mouth. So you should know how to bring the sense object to the correct particular sense, which means you are playing the role of a servant, knowing what the sense wants, and accordingly you are serving. So that's why service is an eternal part of the jiva. This is described in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita. So you're bringing sense objects to your senses. Same way, you're bringing sense objects to the senses of your wife and your son. That's also sense gratification. Now, it extends. You bring them home, shelter, all of that. Then, I've got a wife, my son also should have a wife. So you get him married. Then what do you expect? Then again they should have food, clothing, shelter, all of that. Again my son also should have a son, grandson. Again the same thing continues. This extends to society, this extends to nation. Again you're doing the same thing. You are making them get their senses go near their sense objects, and you are still serving them. But here this ulterior motive is that there could be a trace of demoniac mentality as well, because I am wealthy, I am aristocratic, I am performing charity, I am supporting so many of them. What's the common theme? It's I. I am the master, I am the enjoyer, and that's mentality. I am the proprietor, I am the friend of all living entities. That's the role of the Lord. You cannot take up the role of the Lord and claim that. Because whatever you're trying to give in charity, that wealth belongs to the Lord. Because Mother Lakshmi is always a property of Lord Narayan. If we claim to be the owner of Mother Lakshmi, we're trying to take up the role of Lord Narayan. That's the mentality of Ravana, and that's why he was vanquished. Now, what should be the proper attitude then? Should I stop all the philanthropic activities? Should I stop all food distribution, charity and all of that? No. That's how Prabhupada gives a practical solution in this 5.29 verse, where he says, Krishna consciousness, however, brings one into spiritual life even while one is within the jurisdiction of matter. For it is an arousing of spiritual existence by practice in the material world. So we understand who the proprietor is, and we start to look at the material world from the vision of the Lord. We start to look at other living beings also from the vision of the Lord. Because we are practicing Bhakti Yoga, it gives us the knowledge. The Lord is the proprietor, He is the friend, He is the controller, and He is also the best friend. If we just look at He is the controller, He is a benefactor of all sacrifices, if we just look at that part, it may seem too selfish. Like God seems to be like an autocrat. He's a controller of all demigods, He's all the sacrifices I perform, He takes, He is a benefactor, He is a beneficiary, and what's in it for me? But we should understand that He is also the best friend. And that's why when the term servant is being used, it's not a slave. You're not a slave to God. You are rendering voluntary, transcendental, loving service. And that is called as servant. So we try to bring the Lord's energy in the service of the Lord. And when we are trying to do it for the extended society, we do it with the same mentality, and we are trying not only to save the body by giving food, but we are trying to save the soul by giving prasadam. If a person is just giving food, he and the person who takes the food, both are implicated in karma. But on the other hand, if the same food, clothing, shelter, all of that is given with the idea that it belongs to the Lord and I am acting as a caretaker on behalf of the Lord to protect the soul and the body of other living entities. It said that when a man is drowning, it's not enough that you save his jacket, you save the person as well. These acts of charity, philanthropy, when done with the mentality that the Lord is a proprietor, He is the owner, and when I'm offering the bhoga to the Lord, converting it into prasadam, and that prasadam and those items which are offered to the Lord, that is what I am giving it to others, and that's the best welfare work one can do. So Prabhupada also touches upon the theme of the happiness that you get by doing these kind of activities, philanthropic activities. In the Nectar of Devotion, he touches upon the theme of rasa, where it's a kind of a mellow or an enjoyment that you get by serving others. And this enjoyment of helping others without saving their body, without saving the soul and just saving the body, that's the mundane rasa. However, the same activity done with the proper attitude and proper mentality and proper consciousness, then you experience what is called as the Adi Rasa, connecting the energy of the Lord with the Lord. And that's what if the same activity is done, the same servant is doing the same activity, but he is connecting the energy of the Lord to the Lord, then he experiences rasa, which is the Adi Rasa, of connecting the energy and the Lord and His energy. So this is how the activity of selfless service and charity to the entire community and the nation and country can be spiritualized. So the key principles to remember when doing such activities are, Prabhupada gives it in a nice way. One should always think that Krishna is a proprietor, Krishna is the enjoyer, and Krishna is the friend. If somebody wants to set a motto or a vision or a mission statement, you set this and then you start your work, then all of that activities will be spiritualized. Then the next theme that's coming up is the theme of detachment, and also the theme of conditioning, how the mind is being attached to the temporary material existence, and the theme of controlling the senses, yoga indriya samyamaha. So, if we look at the mind being attached to matter, that is what is the actual problem. That attachment has to be transferred into attachment to the Lord. Because the way to control the mind, as described by His Holiness Shihotra Swami, I think I remember mentioning a few times, the way you control your mind is by controlling your desires. And the way you control your desires is to look at what you're trying to getting attached to. So by looking at what is my mind being attached to, and that is giving rise to a lot of material desires, all the contemplation and all of that, and by slowly withdrawing the mind, as being said here, the senses withdrawing from the sense objects and focusing on the service of the Lord, and then you transfer the attachment to the Lord and His devotees. It's also mentioned by Lord Kapila, Prasangam Ajaram Pasham. Sorry? Atmana Kaviya Vidu. Yeah, go on. Moksha Dwaram Aparadam. Can you tell the meaning, translation? Yes. So when the attachment is transferred to the sadhus, we become free from material entanglement. Thank you. So it's just a matter of transferring that attachment. Because what the sadhus do is they give you spiritual knowledge. And with the sword of knowledge, you cut the knot of attachment. Asanga shastrena dridena chitva. And that's what is being stressed in terms of detachment here. In very serious devotional service with detachment. Thus the mind and consciousness will be under full control. So if we want to control our mind, then look at the desires and look at where we are being attached to and start transferring the attachment to the Lord's devotees and to the scriptures, to the process of bhakti and ultimately to the feet of the Lord. That's why in the 7.1 also Lord will talk about Maya Ashakta Mana Partha Yogam Yunjan Madashayaha Asamshayam Samagram Mam Yatanyashashi Tatshunu. Asakta Mana, mind attached to me. Now, to elaborate on this point about how much the mind is being entangled and how the various sense objects are pulling the senses in different directions and how he is serving those senses can be understood by reading the prayers of Lord Prahlad Maharaj to Narasimhadev. So we will discuss few sections from Prahlad Maharaj's prayers and also prayers to the Chaturvyuha from Lord Shiva. Because one of the powerful ways of transferring the attachment is by engaging in Tivrena Bhakti, and one of the ways of doing it is to repeat the prayers offered by exalted personalities to the Lord. It is one of the potent forms of devotional service where you are reciting notable prayers from Bhagavatam. So this is 7.9.40. This is Prahlad Maharaj taking the role of a conditioned soul. He is praying to the Lord. My dear Lord, O infallible one, my position is like that of a person who has many wives, all trying to attract him in their own way. For example, the tongue is attached to palatable dishes, the genitals to sex with an attractive woman, and the sense of touch to the contact with soft things. The belly, although filled, still wants to eat more, and the ear, not attempting to hear about you, is generally attracted to cinema songs. The sense of smell is attracted to yet another side. The restless eyes are attached to scenes of sense gratification, and the active senses are attracted elsewhere. In this way, I am certainly embarrassed. So if we look at the prayers offered by Prahlad Maharaj, he will often shift between talking like a Mahabhagavat and saying that he is not at all affected by the material world, and sometimes he'll again play the role of a conditioned soul, and then he'll put himself in a very humble position. It will keep switching if you look at if you look at the entire prayers. So this particular verse, Prahlad Maharaj plays the role of a conditioned soul. If it's okay, we can recite the prayers. It's 7.9.40 if you want to load it up in your devices, that section. And we can recite and have some glorification of the Lord since Narasimha Sadhudas is coming. Jivvai kathochuta vikarshatima vitrupta Shishnonyatvastudaram shavanam kutaschid Granonyatascha paladrikvacha karma shaktir Bhavyasya patnya iva geha patim lunanti. So here, in the purport to this particular verse, Prabhupada talks about senses being materially attracted. And this is where, so we know the goal is pure devotion, attaining the Dham, the Sanatana Dham of the Lord. But when applying the process, we need to know where we are at this moment. And this particular verse, I felt, exactly brings how much we are conditioned and how we are pulled in different direction by the senses, and how Prahlad Maharaj is playing the role of a conditioned soul. It's for our benefit that he is reciting these kind of prayers. And I felt it is very pertinent to understand how much we are conditioned, the pulling of each of the senses. And the formation of the entire body is because the mind wanted these kind of enjoyment. When analyzing the coverings of the body in terms of skin, flesh, bone, the marrow, the semen and all of that. Why? Because the mind wanted to enjoy. So when we talk about conditioning, when we have to understand how much we are conditioned, the threefold miseries, they affect us. The three modes, they affect us. Then the amount of coverings within the body, each one of them has its own way that conditions us and pulls us in a different direction. That's why you'll see people in Ayurveda, we see people with different prakriti. Ayurveda will talk about prakriti of a particular person, whether you're predominant of pitta, or predominant of vata, or predominant of kapha. What is it telling about? This is how you are conditioned. And accordingly you will be attracted or repulsed to a particular sense object. So, in this particular purport, Prabhupada will talk about controlling the senses. Now, when discussing about the solutions, how do I get out of it, the prayers to control the mind, the prayer to be offered to control the intelligence, the prayer to be offered to get out of the false ego, all of that is there. We discussed that in the previous chapter, 3.26, 3.26.21, purport Prabhupada writes, in order to get release from false ego, one has to worship Sankarshana. If one wants to get free from mental disturbances, one has to worship Aniruddha. To be fixed in one's intelligence, one has to worship Pradyumna. These matters are explained in Vedic literature. So we are looking at giving up our false ego, giving up controlling our mind, intelligence. So let us recite a few prayers from the 4th chapter, 4th canto, 24th chapter, text 34. Some of you want to load that particular verse, we can recite together. This chapter is entitled Chanting the Song Sung by Lord Shiva, where Lord Shiva has mercifully given prayers to the Chaturvyuha. Four 24:34. I'll read the translation first. My Lord, you are the origin of creation by the virtue of the lotus flower which sprouts from your navel. You are the supreme controller of the senses and the sense objects, and you are also the all-pervading Vasudeva. You are most peaceful, and because of your self-illuminated existence, you are not disturbed by the 6 kinds of transformations. So this is prayer to Lord Vasudeva. Namah Pankajanaabhaya Bhuta Sukshmendriyatmane Vasudevaya Shantaya Kutastaya Swarochise. Next is a prayer to Lord Sankarshana, text 35. My dear Lord, you are the origin of the subtle material ingredients, the master of all integration as well as the master of all disintegration, the predominating deity named Sankarshana, and the master of all intelligence known as the predominating deity Pradyumna. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. So we'll recite the prayer. Sankarshanaya Sukshmaya Durantaya Antakaya Cha Namo Vishwa Prabodhaya Pradyumnaya Antaratmane. Next, text 36. My Lord, as the supreme directing deity known as Aniruddha, you are the master of the senses and the mind. I therefore offer my obeisances unto you again and again. You are known as Ananta as well as Sankarshana because of your ability to destroy the whole creation by the blazing fire from your mouth. Namo Namo Aniruddhaya Rishike Nindriyatmane Namaha Paramahamsaya Purnaya Nibritatmane. Then the last one, text 37. My Lord, O Aniruddha, you are the authority by which the doors of the higher planetary systems and liberation are opened. You are always within the pure heart of the living entity. Therefore, I offer my obeisances unto you. You are the possessor of semen which is like gold, and thus, in the form of fire, you help the Vedic sacrifices, beginning with Chaturhotra. Therefore, I offer my obeisances unto you. Swargapavarga dvaraya Nityam Shuchi Sade Namaha Namo Hiranya Viryaya Chaturhotraya Tantave. Having offered prayers to the Chaturvyuha, we will resume our prayers from Prahlad Maharaj, where he talks about the power of the mind and how in this particular purport Prabhupada will combine mind, intelligence and false ego in the title of mind. So when he's elaborating on the verse 7, 9, 21, he will put a star for manaha, the mind, and then he'll say mind includes mind, intelligence and false ego. I'll read the translation to 7, 9, 21. This is Prahlad Maharaj praying to Lord Narasimhadev. O Lord, O Supreme Eternal, by your expanding your plenary portion, you have created the subtle bodies of the living entities through the agency of your external energy, which is agitated by time. Thus, the mind entraps the living entity in unlimited varieties of desires to be fulfilled by the Vedic directions of karma kanda, fruitive activity, and the 16 elements. Who can get free from this entanglement unless he takes shelter at your lotus feet? So there's an interesting conversation going on between Lord Narasimhadev and Prahlad Maharaj, where Prahlad Maharaj asks, if I am in the form of everything, then I am also samsara. So then why do you want liberation from samsara? Because you're seeing everything as me, I am also samsara. So why do you want liberation? So Prahlad Maharaj answers to that interesting conversation in these two verses, 7, 9, 21 and 22. He says, I don't want to be engaged in your external energy. Maya is your external energy, and that's what is creating the subtle body and the mind and all the elements. And interestingly, this Chandomayam, that word being used in this prayer, Chanda not only means verses, it also means desires. to fulfill the different desires of the living entity, there are various rituals, and that's called Chandomayam. And this wheel of samsara with its 16 transformations, who can overcome it unless one surrenders unto your lotus feet? So, everyone inspired to recite the verse? We'll go 7, 9, 21. Someone's loaded that verse. Maya manasrijati karma mayam baliyaha kale na chodita gunanumate pumsaha chando mayam yada jayarpita shodasharam samsara chakramaja titaretvadanyaha. So this verse clearly describes samsara chakram, how the wheel of repeated birth and death in different species of life, and that's what is being talked about in this particular section as well. Chandomayam, chiefly influenced by the directions of the Vedas. And the wheel of time is described with the 16 spokes. Who can overcome this powerful influence of time, the conditioning with the mind, which the mind entraps one and giving rise to various desires, and the Vedic literature seem to encourage those desires? Who can get out of this unless one takes shelter of your lotus feet? So in the next verse, the pain which the living entity goes through by being crushed by the wheel of time. So Prahlad Maharaj puts himself in that particular role, and then he answers the question to the Lord, I don't want to be crushed in this, in your wheel of time. And that's what he says in 7:9:22, translation. My dear Lord, O Supreme Great, you have created this material world of 16 constituents, but you are transcendental to their material qualities. In other words, these material qualities are under your control and you are never conquered by them. Therefore, the time element is your representation. My Lord, O Supreme, no one can conquer you. As for me, however, I am being crushed by the wheel of time, and therefore I surrender fully unto you. Now kindly take me under the protection of your lotus feet. So, in this section, Prabhupada talks about Maya, the external energy, how the conditioning happens, how conditioned souls are suffering through the miseries of this material world. They take different births. No one except you can save me. And this particular verse, the Swarupa of the living entity is being discussed, and we are taking shelter of the Swarup Shakti of the Lord. And therefore, Prahlad Maharaj says, I don't want to take shelter of your external energy, I want to take shelter of your internal energy. Because it is this internal energy, this Swarup Shakti, which is a combination of Chit and Hiladini potency. So the Chit potency, when it descends into the heart of the living entity, it gives the cognizance, the ability for the living entity to know the Lord. And when you know the Lord, who actually He is, and you want to serve Him, because the facility is also there, when the consciousness changes, the same matter which binds you liberates you. And when you engage the facility in the Lord's service, when you do devotional service, you experience Ananda. So this Swarup Shakti gives this in the heart of a pure devotee, and therefore he becomes detached from matter, and his attachment is transferred to the Lord. And this particular verse Acharyas explain that the Lord removes the ignorance in the subtle body of the jiva. You know how we know that material desires are there, we are trying to control it by following rules and regulations, but there are so many material desires which we don't know, it's in our subconscious mind. This particular prayer will help us to remove those ignorance and those desires which are in the subtle body. So, we will recite 7, 9, 22, the glory of which we discuss now. Sattvam hi nitya vijitatma gunasvadhamna kalo vashikrita visrujya visarga shakti chakre visishtam ajayeshvara shodashare nishpidyamanam upakarsha vibho prapannam. So the word prapannam, who are fully surrendered unto you. So that's what is being described and elaborated by Srila Prabhupada in that particular section, and that's what is being described here. Tivrena bhakti yogena. And one of the ways of transferring our attachment from matter to the Lord is by reciting prayers from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So I'll conclude there and see if there are any comments, corrections, questions related to what we discussed. Yes, Ian. Yeah, so what binds you liberates you. So, food, if it's not offered to the Lord and you eat, Lord describes it's verily sin. Okay? But the same food you cook with love and devotion and offer to your Guru Parampara, and through them you offer to the Lord, you eat prasadam, and then Lord says, my devotees are relieved from sin because of eating prasadam. So like that you can look at every item, offer it to the Lord, and Prabhupada explained this is how we transfer matter into spirit. Like this garland, it is treated with respect. Earlier it was just a flower. When it is offered to the Srila Prabhupada, it becomes prasadam, and then we honor it. So matter transforming into spirit. Yeah. Yeah. What is it that cuts the bondage of material knots? Is it knowledge or bhakti? So the words of the sadhu, so when you are willing to hear the words of the sadhus, then you actually understand who you are, how much conditioned you are, then you become more humble. When you start performing devotional service, you engage your body, mind and words. By that, slowly you become eligible to receive more transcendental knowledge, and through that, because you're getting the higher taste, then these two happen. Because you're getting the higher taste, you're naturally becoming detached from material entanglement or material attachments. So it's the process of bhakti that's being stressed, and the detachment happens as a byproduct. It's not our main focus. Yeah. Okay, yes, ma'am.
I'm just trying to understand Srila Prabhupada's earlier part of the talk. He mentioned that the so-called national leader or humanist does not serve everyone, he serves his senses only.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, are they not the percentage of these so-called leaders and humanists truly do this selfless service? Maybe that may be going to the drain, that's a different thing.
Yeah, how do you define selfless service? What's your definition of selfless service?
Truly trying to serve somebody, truly trying to provide shelter to someone, or
Yeah.
provide food to someone,
Yeah.
or help in some way.
So the nationalist is trying to selflessly provide food, shelter. I'm just repeating your question to the audience. So he's providing food, shelter, everything selflessly. Okay, go on.
So I was just wondering, that may be, because it's not dovetailed in the bhakti path, that may be going in the drain.
Because it's not dovetailed in the bhakti path, it may go in drain. Okay.
So I'm just trying to understand, how is it actually serving one's senses? I mean,
Yeah.
here it's actually Prabhupada said that
He's serving his senses only. Yeah. Okay. Good question. There is sense gratification at a gross level and the sense gratification at a subtle level. If a person, whoever he may be, a nationalist, humanitarian, philanthropic, altruistic activity, they would want to do it, and majority of the times they would also expect some name, fame, glory from that. They may not always do it without expecting too much of propaganda or what's the exact word? Too much of telling everyone that I'm doing it. Right? They have the desire to subtly enjoy the sense gratification of name, fame, profit, glory, adoration. It's not fully selfless. There is an ulterior motive, because why, when a person donates an amount, they create a big check and then they go and give, and then it is clicked and then propaganda is made. Why? Because there's a desire that I am the controller, I am providing them, so therefore I am great. So God is out of picture, and you are thinking you are the enjoyer, you are the friend, you are the supporter, you are the caretaker. So that is a subtle demoniac mentality. Ishvaro aham, aham bhogi. However, as I discussed as a solution, this activity doesn't have to be stopped. We don't have to stop giving shelter, giving food, giving medicines to others. We are not saying that. Do it with the correct attitude, and don't think that you are. So sense gratification, he's satisfying his mind by gaining all of that popularity. Very, very few will not expect popularity from others. Because why? Because I explained the concept of rasa, because they are experiencing a kind of mellow or a rasa from such activities. That's also, I'm expecting something and doing this activity. Therefore, it's not selfless. Although action may seem selfless, but the internal intention is not selfless. And what they gain by that, eventually they get a lot of pious activity, pious credits. But whether it is punya or papa, both are going to give you repeated birth and death. Neither the giver nor the taker is getting out of samsara. When it is done with this proper mentality, both are getting elevated. Swalpam apyasya, even a little amount of advancement helps one progress. Is that okay? Yeah. Yes. People have friends. Material world people have friends. Okay. What is this friendship? Yeah, so when talking about the friendship between Arjuna and Krishna, Lord Krishna, Prabhupada will talk about this mundane friendship. It is only at the level of body. If you have real friendship, one should save the person from the cycle of birth and death. That's what Guru na sasyat. Don't become a father, mother, guru, or a friend or a demigod if you cannot deliver your subordinates from the cycle of birth and death. So real friend is one, and that's actually a good point that you brought out, because the theme of being compassionate, I didn't touch upon that in this section. Purport, one should propagate Krishna consciousness. By that you're doing the best welfare activity and you're acting as the best friend. If you want to become a best friend, bring others to Krishna, who is the best friend. By bringing others to Krishna, you're also acting as a best friend for them. So that's real friendship. You're saving the person from the cycle of repeated birth and death. You're looking at them as spirit soul. Your vision is changed. You're not less looking at the body. You're looking at them as spirit soul. You're connecting a soul to the Supreme Lord. And Lord is pleased. And Lord says that no one is more dear than one who preaches this knowledge to the devotees. So the best friendship is to not only engage socially, go into all those ceremonies and all. You do that as well to maintain friendship and ultimately try to bring them to Krishna consciousness as well. So that's real friendship. Okay? We'll end here. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.